Welcome everyone to our second webinar series, the second webinar of that series, more on assessment for children with CVI, with Amanda Lewick and Elizabeth Hartman. We're glad you all could join us. I'm sorry we have a little bit of a late start today, just a few technical issues on the back end. So here we are again, our last webinar of our 2019-20 series, 20 school year series. We'll have, of course, the next two series in the fall. So Professor Lewick has been in the field of visual impairment for over 40 years, providing direct service, training education professionals, and conducting research and development activities related to individuals with visual impairments in the US and abroad. Her numerous publications relate to visual impairments. And Elizabeth Hartman is an associate professor of education at LaSalle University and a co-lecturer of T560 Universal Design for Learning at Harvard's Graduate School of Education. In her research, she examines teacher implementation of UDL and how UDL is enacted to teach learners with multiple disabilities. She also is a teacher of the visually impaired. All right, thank you. Amanda and Elizabeth, please take it away.
Thank you so much. I'd like to welcome everybody to this session. And this session is, as we promised, more on assessment for children with CVI. And there we go. And here's the agenda for this session. We've done the welcoming. We're going to do an overview of multidimensional assessment with CVI. I'm going to talk about tiers of assessment as a way of understanding the different types of assessments that are needed for children with CVI. Then do a case study with a young man we'll call Ronny and go to the conclusion. So want to remind you that we're having a Q&A session for this, and I want to introduce Dr. Liz Hartman, who's going to talk to you about how to handle the Q&A session.
Hi, good
Dr.
afternoon,
Hartman.
everyone. Thank you, Amanda. I will be, while Amanda's presenting today, in charge of the Q&A, so please feel free to reach out. You can click on Q&A at the bottom of your screen. You can ask me questions or just say hello, and I look forward to chatting with you all. Thank you.
Thanks, everybody, and thanks, Dr. Hartman. Here we go. So let's go to an overview of multidimensional assessment for children with CVI. And I mentioned the tiers of assessment, and the overview of them is that we have 3 tiers of assessment. And I came upon these tiers when I was trying to understand how to put all the different types of assessments that are needed for children with CVI together. And you don't really need to put your assessments into these tiers as you're doing them, but it helps to organize my thinking, and I hope you're thinking about them. So I'll go through them in detail later, but just an overview is that in the first tier, there are visual functions, functional vision, hearing and visual processing, screening, behavioral adaptations, and history taking. Then we go deeper into CVI with second tier for 2 different types, children who have functional vision and children who have profound visual impairment, where you have to consider for children who have functional vision, their visual processing, auditory processing evaluation, neuropsychological evaluation. And for children with profound VI, you have to think about salient and preferred stimuli, responses, environments, a blind sight evaluation, and we talked about blind sight a few seminars ago, and also an auditory processing evaluation. Now, some children with profound CVI when they're young develop more vision, and you can work into more of these second tier types of assessments for children with functional vision for those children. And everybody needs to go into a third tier of assessment in functional tasks and situations, core and expanded core curriculum areas, also in daily living skills for early intervention children, understanding of CVI, environmental analysis, and all this gets integrated into reports. So let's move on into the first tier of assessment and some examples. So the first tier of assessment, I mentioned functional vision and visual functions, and that includes refraction and eyeglasses, which you would pull from the history. If you're a TBI, you would need this information and with a multidisciplinary assessment from an optometrist or ophthalmologist. Accommodation needs, same thing, visual acuity, visual field, color, illumination, ocular motor, and contrast sensitivity. And this would be within an eye examination or a functional vision evaluation out in the field. You would also need hearing and auditory processing screenings. As we mentioned in some of the earlier seminars, many children with CVI have auditory processing issues, and these need to be evaluated before you can do more complex assessments. Also a visual processing screening, and this could be history taking or quick visual perception screening battery, and also look at the behavioral adaptations of the child with CVI. So I want to focus on history taking and screening. And a list of some CVI history taking and screening tools that have been validated for children is at the end of this presentation, and you can review those, and there are a lot of references for you. The list is not exhaustive of all that's out there, and more tools are coming out all the time, so you have to be on the lookout for them. We're not able to go through every tool that's available in a 1-hour webinar, so we're just going to present some of the tools that can highlight some of the issues for you. Now, in the history taking and interviews, this is required throughout all the tiers of assessment. That's why I said you can't just pigeonhole history taking into the first tier, the second tier, or the third tier. You're going to be looking at that the whole time and interviewing people the whole time. And the same with observations. It's very important to include observations in all your tiers of assessment. So there are structured history taking tools that seek behavioral evidence from caregivers of basic visual functioning, such as visual field and acuity, visual processing, likes and dislikes for motivators to implement assessment and intervention plans, behaviors that are not well understood, and understanding CVI and concerns about the child. And it's very important to do this at the beginning, at the middle, at the end, and continue doing it, because the children's behaviors and the issues surrounding the child change as they change and grow, as the world around them changes, as they move on to different environments, different schools, different play groups. There are different types of questions for history taking. There are open-ended questions and there are more directive questions. And I think I've mentioned to you the CVI companion guide that we're developing. And here are some examples from the questionnaire in the CVI companion guide that are open-ended. And that rather than lead the person to the answer that you're kind of looking for, you're just trying to see what they think and then go from there. So an open-ended question is, tell me about your child's vision. What does your child see? What are your child's favorite things to look at? What are your child's favorite things to do? How does your child search for things? What are your major concerns about your child's vision? Now, I want to give you some examples of directed interview questions to gather CVI profile information. And here's just a few from the CVI companion guide. Now, if you recall, we've got a lot of visual consequences and functional consequences of CVI in the CVI profile. So just for the example of clarity of vision, to get more directed questions. How does your child pay attention to things up close using vision? How does your child pay attention to things using vision that are far away? How far away? Does your child prefer to see things in any specific direction or at any specific distance? So those would be the more directive types of questions. Now, rather than talk about interviews, I want to show you a video of an interview of a child who has CVI, developed CVI from meningitis at an early age, and whose vision completely went away, came back. And this is Carole, his O&M instructor, when this child is 11 years of age, describing her mobility lessons to him.
Okay. You want to tell us a little bit about Jack's mobility?
Yes, I've been working with Jack in mobility for about 2 years now. His basic mobility around the campus has always been pretty good and fairly controlled, so we didn't move off the campus to start building some skills till about 2 years ago. So, and we've worked we've started off just in quiet residential areas, talked about intersections, addresses, where you find street signs, where you find important information is basically it, because he doesn't know how to look at things until you tell him what he's going to look at and why it would be important. After that, he usually can find it on his own. So.
And does he have any difficulties getting around on surfaces, stairs, anything like that?
Often on an orientation and mobility lesson, he does very well, but it's the only thing that he's concentrating on. There are complaints from the family about tripping, missing steps, dropping huge drop-offs where, like if they're on vacation, it's a struggle for him. So new environments are a real challenge for him. But during mobility, he seems to show actually fairly good skills. When he sees a color change and he suspects that there's going to be a difference in height, he slides his foot, checks things with his hand just very casually at his side. So I think the potential for difference, for missing surface differences is there, but when he's actually concentrating on it, it goes fairly well.
So he does better when he's concentrating, when he's moving around?
When there are fewer distractions, he does significantly better. And so I guess overall, when I do orientation mobility with him, I have it designed so that I've minimized the distractions. And so I usually probably get the optimal performance. We've started adding in a few distractions, or sometimes they come up because somebody comes toward us with a skateboard or a bike or something. You know, I have a chance to see what happens when there's new information that gets entered into the scene.
And what happens?
A lot of times Jack kind of freezes. He can't judge where the other person is going to be. Even someone walking toward him quickly can cause a problem because he can't seem to make the judgment on whether they're going to step to the left or to the right or what the common movement might be, and then he doesn't know where to put his body. So I think that there's a little bit of a slowness with taking in the visual information and processing it and then making that judgment and then asking his body to do what it needs to do to stay safe under those circumstances.
Okay. What about facial recognition for Jack?
There have been significant problems with facial recognition for Jack. He has been pretty close to with the same group of children in his classroom since kindergarten, and he's now in the 5th grade. And I would say he knows the name of maybe one child in his class, or could recognize one child in his class. I don't know whether he could randomly talk about names that he's heard. If he were standing in front of a common activity in school is that you take your turn and then you select the next person to take their turn, and he will always pick the same person because I don't think he can look out and put a name and a face together in his classroom. So that's the first place that I saw it. I have had reports of Jack being out on a field trip, and field trip where lots of groups might be, like a theater production where not only children from Walnut Grove are there, but other schools and other classes. And when it's time to line up, he's lined up with a completely different school group. So he apparently didn't recognize the adults or the children, or realize that they were even unfamiliar faces. He just stood in a line, which is disconcerting to me. That's a difficult situation. I've always suspected that Jack's lower field is probably his weakest field, that he may not be seeing things that are at ground level. Although I would say there have been some improvements, because he does slide his feet if he sees those color changes to make sure that there's not a height difference. I've done some research as to whether I should introduce a cane with Jack. My basic conclusion has been that possibly a lightweight cane that he would carry for identification, so that other people would recognize that he may not see everything, would be of the most value. But children with CVI are really complicated, and so we have a situation where Jack's muscle tone is low, where he processes visual information very slowly, and he is also highly distractible with anything in his hands. So in the classroom, if he's using manipulatives for anything, he'll get overly involved with what's in his hand and not remember the project. So we have attention problems, muscle tone problems, and slow processing. So I think that with the cane in his hand, we'd have originally the distraction, then he would have to get the information from the end of the cane, and his hands are not very good. So I think we would have a problem with him picking up the right information that the cane would be delivering to his hand. Then he would have to process that information and then take a body that has low muscle tone and problem solve what he needs to do to avoid the danger. And at this point, he's always traveling with someone else in unfamiliar surroundings. He doesn't go off on his own, as would be appropriate for the age. I mean, I don't think many children in the 5th grade are just out in unfamiliar surroundings. And in familiar surroundings, he's aware of what he needs to be careful of. So I think at this point, it's better to leave his brain a little freer to concentrate on the task at hand than to introduce yet one more thing for him to be thinking about or distracted by. Not pushed him into that. Him to go.
That and other instances on the playground.
Now, Jack, just recently I did a mobility lesson with him where after school, I stood in the middle of the playground with him here at Walnut Grove, which is a playground that he knows, and I asked him to tell me what he saw that was significant. And he named the climbing structure, the basketball hoops, the tether balls. He could see where the buildings were and the grassy area. So he was really familiar with that whole area. And even more so, then we drove to a school that he doesn't know, and we came in from the backside so he wouldn't have the recognition at the in the front of it saying Donlin School or something like that. So we entered through a big park area, and my only instruction to him was to say, if you see anything that you feel could be important or you recognize something, stop and let me know what it is. I'd like to know how far out you might see something. And I don't even remember the distance, but probably at least 20 feet away, coming in from the backside of a school, he said, "That's a school over there." and I asked him why he knew, and he said, because I can see the whole playground. So he recognized all of that, and yet he will go to great lengths to avoid crowded situations on the playground here at the school. I asked him if he plays on the play structure, and he said, oh no, too many children on the play structure. I don't go to the play structure. I said, where do you play? And he said, he pointed to an area, a fairly remote area of the grass, and I think that that was what he felt was safe for him. And we had that experience again today when we were over at the middle school and heard some children out on the yard having physical education, I guess, but there were a lot of children there. And I asked him what he heard, and he said children and balls. I told him that I'd like to walk over there, which I don't think he was very excited to do. And we stood at the edge of the schoolyard, and he said, I think it's going to be dangerous. And I said, well, what would make it dangerous? And he said, children and balls, which sort of referred back to what we heard in the first place. I asked him if he would please walk all the way across the blacktop to get to the fence on the other end. And he stood there for a really long time. And then he turned left and hung right next to the building. He was just going to keep walking next to the building and avoid the yard completely. And I stopped him and I brought him back. And I said, well, I know this one's really hard, but I'd really like to see if you could make your way across the playground. And there are balls flying. A ball had already come straight at us once, and children moving around in unpredictable ways because they're playing ball. So, they're not just walking and talking to each other or something. And with great trepidation, he did make his way across the yard. He didn't want to do it. I know he didn't want to do it. He was very nervous about children running into him, having to make those decisions about balls coming toward him, but he was successful in getting across the yard. He stopped a few times. He was kind of halting in the way that he was moving, very different than the way he moves down a sidewalk where he has a clear path and he knows what he's looking at. So we made it both directions, but it was definitely not an activity that he wanted to do and would not have done it had I not pushed him into that.
Okay.
There. So I want to mention to you that Jack, the child who she was describing, has 20/40 acuity at the time, and was able to read and obviously was able to get around, but the circumstances made it difficult for him to get around. And that in that interview, we learned quite a bit about Jack and what he could do, what he wanted to do, what motivated him, and what the mobility instructor tried out with him and might not try out again, such as having him walk across a busy playground. He certainly wouldn't do it on his own, but she was watching him the whole time. So here is a question one for contributing to the conversation in the chat. Why do you think interviews are such an important component of the assessment process for children who have CVI? And then Dr. Hartman, do you have any chat questions that we could answer at this point, or at least one chat question? So now let's talk a little bit about observations. And as I mentioned earlier, observations are important across all those tiers of assessment, but it's important across environments and within all assessments, not just assessments for CVI. We know that different environments can affect performance. We need to look at how children approach and complete assessment tasks, and also follow the process rather than only the final scores. And I'm going to give you an example of that in a moment. And also conduct observations within formal testing situations. So here's my example of an observation underlying performance of an existing assessment tool. And this tool was not specifically designed for CVI. It's something that I feel comfortable with. And there might be tools that you feel comfortable with, and you would be able to look at some of these issues and even other issues. This is a test looking at print size. And it's available from the American Printing House for the Blind. It's actually something that Ian Bailey from UC Berkeley and I developed. And this is the pre-primer card from that. And I will often give this to children who are beginning readers who have CVI. And I'm interested in print size. But what I found is when giving this test, I find so much information about the quality of their CVI. I can look to see if they can read each word on a line, if they skip words on a line, if they skip letters within words, if they have trouble finding the beginning of the next line, if they have trouble going to smaller and smaller print sizes. And I think I mentioned to you earlier that some children find having smaller screens more easily read or viewed. And so they might not actually have problems with the smaller print, but with the larger print, especially if they have ocular motor problems tracking along the line. I've found some children have trouble finding the top of the page. They might have a field loss or neglect, or they might only read part of a line if they have something like a field loss or visual neglect. And if I move the page to the right or the left of midline, their behavior changes considerably. So this is a tool that I use. Now, another thing that I use is a typoscope to try to see if this helps the children isolate the words. But interestingly, when I tried this with, I think she was 17 or an 18-year-old girl with CVI, she told me, and I always used to recommend the typoscope for everybody, for everything, because I find it such a helpful device. Typoscope is this reading, it's a card that's a reading window. And I just made a window around this to show you. The child told me that the black around the word was more of a distractor than a help. And so she was having trouble reading the print because her eyes kept going to the black around the side. So that was really helpful to me. She also told me that she prefers not having the black around highlighting anything, that there's certain colors that were easier for her to see for highlighting words. So it's very hard to make hard and fast rules about children with CVI. The rules that I thought were hard and fast, like this typoscope, well, that was gone with the wind. But you can see how just using this tool that I find very useful for determining print size in children with ocular visual impairment gave me so much more information than I realized it would give me for children with CVI. And you can think about the assessments that you use and all the kinds of information just based upon the process of answering the questions and performing the items on the test will give you about the child's CVI. Here's another test that I like to use, and these are cancellation tests, and I found these on a test that I'm going to show you about a little bit later called the EVA. And these tests are used a lot by occupational therapists for determining visual neglect. And the direction is to find all, on the left-hand side, there are A's and there are in different orientations. And so the direction is to find the A with the same orientation on the page. And if there's visual neglect, a portion of the page might be neglected. So I tried this, and also this is a teddy bear test where you just cross out all the teddy bears. And what I found that was really interesting with children with CVI is that their search patterns are really different. And they might just go here and then here and then here and then go back, or they might do a certain portion of the page, then go back and do another portion of the page. And that tells me how they work on problems with reading and print reading and looking at pictures and things like that. Now, again, it could be that simultaneous agnosia or the crowding on a page can enter into this. And that's another thing that we have to think about with children with CVI. So doing this test is really helpful in just looking at how children process information on a test that's not meant for children with CVI except for visual neglect. So let's look at some second-tier assessment examples. And the second-tier assessment for children with functional vision would be visual processing information, such as dorsal and ventral stream information and other processing issues, going more deeply into an auditory processing evaluation, which would need to be done by a qualified professional, such as a speech-language pathologist, and additional neuropsychological evaluations. Some second-tier assessments for dorsal stream would be dysfunction of the lower visual field impairment, or dysfunction, neglect of the lower visual field, visual guidance of movement of the lower limbs, visual guide of movement of the upper limbs and hands, surface pattern recognition, estimation of the speed of moving targets, visual search, maintaining and shifting visual attention, intersensory attention, and auditory search and processing. And here are some things to look for in the ventral stream. And we talked about this in an earlier webinar: identification of people, objects, shapes, pictures, words, facial expressions. Child could have problems with one of these, with all of these, with certain shapes, with certain pictures, with certain words, with certain letters. The inability to locate objects because you can't recognize them. So if you can't recognize them, you can't locate them. Orientation in surrounding environment related to topographic agnosia, where you can't rely on visual cues to guide a travel route if you can't recognize the objects. I think that's one of the reasons that Carole was asking Jack about verbalizing what he could see in the environment so that she could be sure that he could see them in order to use them to guide his travel. And orientation of lines, creating figures, copying, and mental rotating pictures. For the second tier of children with profound visual impairment, need to evaluate salient and preferred stimuli. What gets those children? What are they stimulated by? How do they respond? Well, how do they prefer to respond? And what are their preferred environments? A blind sight evaluation for children who have very limited vision, but might be able to have some vision in their peripheral fields, or be able to walk around things without knowing it. And again, the auditory processing evaluation for this group of children also. Now, I'm going to give you some examples of second-tier assessments. Some of these you might not know, and some of them you'd be probably very familiar with. what I want to stress is that in showing you these assessments, you'll see that they look at different aspects of CVI. And these different aspects of CVI may all be operating, may not be operating, but there are different ways of looking at CVI, and there are different consequences of CVI, and no one assessment looks at all the things that are associated with CVI. So in the second tier, we talked about the structured history taking, and that would be continued as needed. And I mentioned earlier the level of visual attention in activities with that great question. And this is by an occupational therapist, Marieke Steendam from Visio in the Netherlands. And you'll find it discussed in Vision in the Brain. But that group looks at the level of visual attention and works at increasing children's level of visual attention. So it starts at the bottom with uses primarily other senses and visual attention is minimal or non-existent, fixates briefly and may follow objects momentarily, looks attentively for brief periods independently or with prompts, but not all situations, looks attentively independently in many activities, but on occasion still uses other senses to explore and for information, and looks attentively independently in most activities, although visual tasks may still present challenges. So here what they've done is they've combined the level of attention with visual attention. And you can see that as vision improves, the level of visual attention also improves. And that was why, for me, it's difficult to separate attention from visual attention. Now, most of you know about the CVI range by Roman Lansky. This is another tier 2, in my opinion, assessment for children with CVI that highlights 10 characteristics of cortical visual impairment. And it has 10 areas that they've identified: color preference, need for movement, visual latency, visual field preferences, difficulty with visual complexity, light gazing and non-purposeful gaze, difficulty with distance viewing, atypical visual reflexes and the blink reflex, difficulty with visual novelty, and absence of visually guided reach. And so these are the 10 characteristics that are part of the CVI range. Another way of looking at CVI is through the use of the Lea Rectangle Game. And this is a screening tool to observe eye-hand processes. So it's looking at CVI in yet another way. And here, what they have are matching rectangles in gray and black, and all the rectangles are the same area. So if you multiply the width and the height of every rectangle, the area is the same. And the rectangles in this slide that I made are probably not up to scale, but I wanted to give you a sense of what they looked like. So if you ask a child, if you put them all along a table and ask a child to match the rectangles, that shows you if they're able to match, and it's a ventral stream function. And one way of simplifying the task is to put, say, all the black rectangles on the surface to make a pyramid, with the longest one at the bottom and the shortest one at the fattest and the shortest one at the top. So you have kind of a little pyramid, and then ask the child to place the gray rectangles on top. Another way of looking at this test is how they pick up the rectangle. When you pick something up, your hand conforms to the shape of the object. Let me give you an example. I have a little clock here, And I'm going to go pick it up, and my hand, you saw, stretched way out to pick up this clock. And for children with CVI who have dorsal stream functions, the width of the thumb and the forefinger may not conform to the size of the rectangle. And that tells you a little bit about eye-hand processing. Another thing to look at, the presentation of forms to copy, such as parallel lines, crosses, circles, rectangles, forms with angles in them, forms with forms and inside forms. And I have a picture here where a child is shown how to draw each form rather than just presenting a completely done print form, that for some children with CVI, modeling the form, the way the form is drawn, makes it easier for them to copy that form. And this is also from a lot of Dr. Lea Havarnen's websites. Another Lea Havarnen test is the sneer symbol card. And this has 4 shapes on it: a circle, a square, an apple that can also be called a heart, and a house. And it has spaced symbols on one side and non-spaced symbols on the other side. And you can ask a student who can't read letters to name the symbols to see if there's more difficulty with the spaced versus the non-spaced symbols. The non-spaced symbols are closer to what print reading is like. You can record the smallest line red in terms of its size. And here you can also look at the process and record any errors and where they were positioned on the line, the beginning, the middle, and the end, what was skipped, finding the next line. And you can use this information to guide intervention plans. And some of these tests from the Lea battery of tests can be found at Goodlight. And I gave you the reference for that. Now, I mentioned that I would show you a test that had the teddy bear test and the cancellation test. And this is the EVA, the Evaluation of Visuotential Abilities. And this was developed in France for children 4 to 6 years of age. And it's a screening test for children who have not been picked up for CVI, may have normal to near normal ability, but they have CVI, and if it's not picked up, they can certainly have trouble when they enter school and they have to do a lot of pre-academic and academic work. And there are 9 subtests, and the test has been standardized and validated. There's tests are gaze fixation, where you can maintain fixation on something. A visual field test using a confrontation test at 30 to 40 centimeters. Visual extinction, where you can see 2 objects at the same time. Binocular visual pursuit, which is being able to follow a target. Visual memory, which is finding shapes among 6 others. The teddy bear cancellation test, which I went through, the A cancellation test. There's an embedded figure test where you can identify overlapping figures, and a matching test to match drawings found amongst 6 others. And here are some of the items on the EVA test, or an explanation of the items. And I given you at the end a way to get a hold of the EVA test. And it's in one of the slides at the end where you can contact the research organization in France. Another test that's available free online that was just finished a number of years to get standardization data is called the CVIT, the Children's Visual Impairment Test for 3 to 6 year olds. And that's for mid and high level brain functions, for object recognition, degraded object recognition, motion perception, global local processing, and it's computer-based with 14 subtests. So you can just go online, sign up, register, and then administer the tests. And again, not just look at the scores, but look at the types of items that children can or can't respond to correctly to get some sense of another aspect of their CVI. So, who should implement second-tier assessments and why? A thought question. Dr. Hartman, do you have a question for us?
None that I'd like to bring to the front. I think we'll keep going.
Okay. Third-tier assessments. And these are within functional tasks or situations. And that's learning media, reading, math, O&M, independent or daily living skills, social skills, PE and sports, assistive technology and use, other subjects, and very importantly, self-determination. Remember that if a child has difficulty recognizing things in their environment, how are they going to negotiate novel environments independently? And how can we work with them to encourage this, to give them alternatives and accommodations if they really, really have difficulty and have topographic agnosia? And that goes in the school and in the out on the streets. I saw one child with CVI who could not find a way around her school building and go from one room to the other, even though her acuity was not that bad. Another site is Teach CVI website. And if you haven't looked at this website, it discusses many assessment tools and how to use them for assessment of visual function, as well as neuropsychological and functional vision assessment of children who have CVI. One thing that I particularly like is what they call a literacy profile for gathering information about functional vision and literacy of children with CVI. And they also have strategies and resources for pre-reading, reading, and access to curriculum. Analysis of environment is another thing that we need to think about for children with CVI. A simplified way of looking at this is Envision in the Brain, where you look at the visual task to be performed, the location, within what general activity, list competing sensory stimuli that affect successful task completion, and environmental adjustment that's recommended. Now, clearly you can't make up a list of this for every place that a child is going to be at any time during the school day. But if you keep this type of analysis in your head, you can make recommendations for how an environment can be accommodated. For example, finding food on a tray in a school cafeteria. And there could be competing things like movement of children, loud conversations, the dishes in the tray are the same color, and the food is sometimes very close in color. And there are things to reduce distractions, like sitting the class at a table at the edge of the cafeteria, being the first class to arrive for fewer distractions, making adjustments to the food dishes and the trays, and perhaps even having a special tray for the child. Now, a more advanced system is one that was developed by Matt Tejan, and it's called What's the Complexity? And it's a detailed system for evaluating the complexity of environments and tasks. It provides guidance regarding provision of appropriate environments, so that activities are balanced and not overwhelming. And it identifies when environments have visual demands that may be frustrating, challenging, comfortable, or tasks throughout the school day. So it's a nice system. It takes a lot of work to set it up, but it's apparently very, very helpful to people. And you can give this to aides and other teachers, and they can work with the children with them throughout the school day and balance their school day with different types of activities. We also talked about understanding of CVI, and it's necessary to evaluate this from the viewpoint of the child, the family, the professional staff, and peers, and find out how they understand CVI, what needs to be explained to them so that they understand why the child operates the way he or she operates and how they can help the child. It includes information from observation and interview, which is critical here. And it's very critical to include the child. If the child is verbal and is able to explain things to you, very often they explain things that you may not understand. I can give you the example of the child with the typoscope who told me that it was actually distracting for her. I'm going to cough for a second. And it's allergies. So assessment within tasks. We have third-tier test assessments tied to interventions, including diagnostic teaching. And that's going to be covered in depth within the next set of webinars. And I want to get into the case study. And here's a hypothetical case study with Ronny. And we had to bring all the information together that we had at the time. And what I will tell you is that it just brought up more information that we needed to go into in depth. So he was a 6-year-old boy, hearing impairment, right ear, orthopedic impairment, leg braces, but able to walk independently, 20/40 visual acuity in each eye, premature with periventricular leukomalacia, PVL, CVI, and ONH, behind in school, doing well in a very well organized and quiet classroom environment. So what we found when we observed and collected data by interview was that he skipped letters when reading if there wasn't a pointer. He had no problem identifying isolated letters or familiar people in a familiar room. He was cautious when navigating surface elevation changes, cautious in place structures using a hand to navigate when there is an overhead structure. Easily overwhelmed in noisy environments, easily distracted, and difficulty talking and walking at the same time. And that should bring up a lot of the consequences that we identified in the CVI profile that we talked about in the previous webinar. So we felt that we needed additional observations. So we found that when we watched Ronny read, he had difficulty finding the top of the page. And his teachers felt that this was a behavioral and avoidance mechanism for him. But I'm going to move you down to here. When we took him to the easel when standing, he could not locate items above his midline when looking straight ahead. So that had implications for his reading instruction and for mobility, and that may have entered into his difficulty finding the top of the page while reading. He had difficulty finding his classroom when walking in the hallway, even though we knew he had 20/40 acuity, and cognitively he would have been able to find the classroom. When counting fingers on a rapidly moving hand, the fingers disappeared at higher speeds in all fields, and that was at higher speeds than it would for a child with typical vision. So he had trouble seeing rapidly moving objects, and he had a lower field impairment from our observations. So the next steps for Ronny's assessment was the assessment in functional tasks or situations, observe and evaluate Ronny in expanded core curriculum areas, do an environmental analysis, and also try to understand how CVI of Ronny's was viewed by Ronny himself, his family, and school staff, because we didn't want the school staff and the family to misidentify why Ronny was avoiding things. Think about why Jack was avoiding walking across that busy playground when he actually could not see what was going on in that playground, and it was dangerous to him. And so his reluctance to walk across that playground was quite reasonable. So the key to a sound assessment is bringing the collected information together to carefully paint a picture of the child and to determine appropriate interventions. Remember that painting a picture of the child is what is needed in any kind of assessment, and it's particularly important for children with CVI. Assessment with children with CVI takes time, patience, and thought. Now, I'm going to ask these few questions, and we're going to go a little bit over because we started a little bit late. So what more would you need to know about Ronny? With the information that you have, what teaching methods would you try out with Ronny? And why do you think they might work? What are your teaching hypotheses? And in the next webinar, we're going to talk about assessment tied to tasks. And I want to show you all the references that we have to this webinar. I'm not obviously going to go through them, but you'll have access to them because they'll be highlighted. But let's see if there are any questions. We can ask maybe one or two questions, answer one or two questions at the end here before moving on. Because there's a lot of information in this webinar. Dr. Hartman, any questions? So I think we're going to end the seminar now. I'd like to thank you all for coming, and I look forward to seeing you again in the fall when the seminars that are more related to connecting assessment and intervention and looking at interventions will arise, and where we'll be talking more about interventions for young children, children with deafblindness, and children who have multiple disabilities with adjustments for multiple disabilities based upon the new CVI companion guide that we hope will be coming out really soon. So I want to thank you. I want to wish you all well, and see you in the fall.
And everyone, just to let you know, that webinar series will begin on September 23rd, and the second part of that third series will be September 30th, and then the next two will be in October 14th and 28th. And let me just show my screen so everyone can see the webinar code and the QR code. You can get right into the post-test evaluation and the post-test test and evaluation. If you could please fill that out, we do use that to report data, and we use your feedback for the next type of trainings we should have available. So the webinar code is JAD182. Thank you for sticking with us this extra 15 minutes. We know we started 5 minutes late, but that still took you about 10 minutes over and 15 minutes over your planned time. We do appreciate you sticking around with us. We hope you found this webinar information relevant, and you'll use it in your future practice. And have a great week, guys.
And let me thank Dr. Hartman too.
Yes, a round of applause. Great job.
Back channel.
Thank you, everyone.
So hard.
It is.